It's mostly believed that recovery is about fixing the drug problem. Remove the substance, stabilise the brain, and everything improves. But that doesn't seem to be what we get in practice. People don't just lose a drug, they lose rhythm, connection, and meaning. And nothing in modern treatment replaces that. So recovery becomes repetition without purpose, and relapse isn't failure, it's gravity. Which means something deeper is missing. And if addiction isn't just about the drug, what exactly have we taken it away? Drugs and Addiction, an Anarchist Perspective, Dickie Dredd. This is part 51 in Chapter 6, Medicine and Misdiagnosis, and this is the last part in that chapter before we move on to Chapter 7. So, Section 53, Ritual, Rhythm and Recovery. Restoring the sacred to medicine. Addiction begins as repetition without meaning. Recovery, at its best, reintroduces meaning to repetition. The old distinction between medicine and ritual is an illusion born of hierarchy. Long before psychiatrists or clinics, people healed themselves through rhythm, story and ceremony. The dance, the drum, the chant, all were technologies of regulation and belonging. Section 24 traced how prohibition stripped those practices of legitimacy. Section 44 showed how psychedelics reopened them under laboratory lights. What is returning now is not novelty, but memory. The recognition that recovery is not chemical correction, but connection. The field and the festival remain the truest classrooms. Truest classrooms for that lesson. In those temporary republics of rhythm, the categories of patient and healer dissolve. The same baseline that once fueled excess becomes a pulse of restoration. Music offers what medication mimics: synchrony, breath, and the return of time to the body. In physics, I once measured noise in decibels. In the dance tent, I measured it in laughter. That too is data. When people move together, their physiology entrains. Hearts align, cortisol drops, oxytocin rises. Science is only now confirming what ritual knew all along. Excuse me, I'm just going to stop that ticking noise. Bloody fan on the burner. Doing my head in. Right. Sorry. Right. To treat addiction without acknowledging that need for rhythm is to treat drought without mentioning water. The chemical is secondary. The cadence is primary. LSD and psilocybin, explored in Section 44, open doors precisely because they dissolve the managerial self and return perception to pulse. Under guidance, they become tools of integration rather than escape, a pharmacology of empathy. The same applies to non-chemical practices: breathwork, meditation, somatic movement, drumming, and collective labour. Each dismantles hierarchy and reinstates participation. Healing happens in circles, not pyramids. Yet the institutions charged with healing remain trapped in pyramids of their own making. Over the past decade, massive cuts to mental health and addiction services in the UK have left wide regions without meaningful support. Waiting lists stretch for months, counselling contracts are outsourced to profit-driven providers, emergency departments now shoulder the fallout. A&E wards fill nightly with the untreated and the overwhelmed, while overstretched staff perform crisis triage in place of care. Helplines proliferate to mask the void. The rhetoric of compassion hides a regime of scarcity. Across the UK, a handful of councils now pay for residents to quit smoking through the Alan Carr Easy Way programme. The method, discussed in Chapter 1, offers a marriage of mystic and municipal, a secular sermon that breaks down all the illusions of nicotine addiction and other forms of addiction in his books, now partially delivered by Public Health. Kent, Cumberland and a few London boroughs offer it freely, while most of the country still points smokers towards a nurse with a clipboard, a leaflet that smells of bureaucracy and replacement therapy. The difference is ritual. Carr understood that the craving is not chemical alone, it's theatrical and strengthened by propaganda. His seminars replaced the cigarette ceremony, and another kind of performance, collective understanding and unhypnosis. People gather, listen, laugh nervously, cry a bit, and walk out lighter than they arrived after a final cigarette. Whether the spirit evoked is neurochemical or numinous hardly matters. The brain loves a rite. It certainly worked for me. So why do most authorities still avoid it? Partly the paperwork. Councils are obliged to commission only evidence-based methods, and the evidence that counts is the kind that fits on a spreadsheet. A room full of ex-smokers grinning at each other confuses the metric. Funding cycles are short, contracts shorter. Easy Way's success depends on story and atmosphere. Two things procurement forms cannot measure. Some officials also mistrust anything that smells of charisma, but public health prefers protocols to profits. The constraint runs deeper than budget lines. When healing becomes a managed service, spontaneity looks suspicious. To endorse a method that works through understanding, laughter and metaphor is to admit that the body listens to meaning as much as medicine. That idea unsettles both bureaucracy and biochemistry. If recovery can be taught in an afternoon without patches, prescriptions of data dashboards, what else might be cured by consciousness alone? Councils that have embraced the programme do so cautiously, often as pilots. Sessions are capped, eligibility checked, outcomes surveyed. Ritual is permitted only if it behaves. Yet the popularity of these experiments hits at a wider hunger. People want to heal together, not to be processed alone. In that sense, the Easy Way seminar, the ancient sweat lodge, share a logic. Both transform repetition into release. The state may foot the bill, but the magic, however modest, remains collective. For all its popularity, the Easy Way method still sits awkwardly between miracle and method. A recent review found quit rates between 19% and 51%, although better than conventional non-smoking services. One UK randomised trial reported 90% abstinent at 6 months, compared with 15% for the NHS Behavioural Plus Pharmacology group. An Irish study fared better. 22% of Easy Way participants were still smoke-free after a year, against 11% of the state's online services. Company data, less modestly, claims success rates above 50% at 12 months. The problem, as ever, is evidence that won't sit still. Most studies are small, self-selecting and prone to the zeal of the converted. A seminar full of volunteers who've paid to quit is hardly a random sample of the nation's nicotine addicts. Success may owe as much to the performance as to psychology, a kind of collective unhypnosis rather than a pharmacological fix. Public health auditors prefer numbers they can count, not crowds who clap. Yet the numbers deserve their stage. Typical NHS services manage 12% to 14% quit rates at 6 months, whilst nicotine replacement and vaping hover around 10 to 18%. Easy Way sits squarely above that band, without the cost of patches, prescriptions or repeat appointments. NICE now lists it as a legitimate behavioural option, which in bureaucratic terms is the first sign of affection. For councils with thin budgets and thick plumes of smoke still rising, a free seminar that mixes charisma with chemistry may be worth the punt. Whatever's doing the heavy lifting, dopamine or drama, some people really do walk out lighter, and it worked for me. I haven't smoked for about 8 months now. I did it for booze as well, but that's another story. Ritual offers another route. Lighting a pipe with intention, sharing food before a trip, thanking the plant or the chemistry. These gestures remind us that consciousness is not property. Addiction thrives on isolation. Ritual rebuilds relation. It is anarchist medicine in miniature, decentralised, transparent and voluntary. When people gather to heal one another without intermediaries, they embody the open source science of Section 48. Meaning circulates like data, freely exchanged. The ecological dimension follows naturally. Every substance that alters consciousness originates in an ecosystem, leaf, root, fungus, molecule. To honour the source is to recognise interdependence. Modern addiction treatment rarely speaks of soil or season, yet the cycle of craving mirrors the cycle of extraction. Take exhaust, discard. Sustainable recovery demands reconnection, not only with people but with place. The permaculture principle, care for the earth, care for people, share the surplus, should be medicine's motto, if hierarchy allowed it. The ecology of dependence is also the ecology of repair. When cultivation replaces exploitation of plants, bodies, or emotions, addiction loses its ground. My own turn point came not in therapy, but in a garden. Planting seedlings during early recovery, I felt the same satisfaction once found in ritual use, repetition with purpose. The soil offered feedback subtler than any counsellor. Nurture what you tend, neglect when it withers. Gardening became my new pharmacology. Compost heap my laboratory. The rhythm of watering and waiting rewired the need for instant relief. That is what Chapter 8 will call integration, not the high, but its echo embedded in daily life. Medicine could learn from that humility. The future healer will look less like a technician and more like a participant. Doctor as a comrade, not a commander. As Section 52 argued, the ethics of care begin where hierarchy ends. Mutual aid clinics, drug checking collectives and peer support networks already sketch this post-prohibition practice. They honour knowledge wherever it lives, in experience as much as expertise. The white coat can remain, but only if worn lightly, like a costume for shared ritual rather than a badge of rank. None of this denies the utility of science. It completes it. Data without story is brittle. Story without data drifts. Together they form what Virala et al. Called inactive cognition, knowing through participation. In addiction work, that means research conducted with, not on, those who use. It means designing studies as conversations and therapies as collaborations. The metric becomes not abstinence but agency, healing measured in degrees of autonomy rather than days clean. Addiction, after all, is a crisis of a relationship between self and self, person and person, humanity and habitat. To restore those connections is to restore meaning. Ritual, rhythm and recovery are the same movement viewed through different lenses. Biological, social, spiritual. The baseline, the breath and the bloodstream converge. What the clinic calls remission, the circle calls reunion. As Chapter 8 will explore, integration is the art of carrying that reunion into ordinary time. The challenge is not to stay high, but to stay connected. The post-industrial world teaches isolation, quantification and performance. Ritual teaches belonging, listening and synchrony. The addict learns to dance again, not to forget, but to remember. The sacred returns quietly, in gardens, kitchens, workshops, and yes, in the music that still shakes the mud at dawn. Healing in the end is rhythm rediscovered. Addiction was never just about substances. You must have said that 100 times now. It was about what happens when rhythm, meaning and connection are stripped out of life. Which means systems built on control, treatment and compliance are aimed at the wrong target. So if recovery fails, not because people are broken, but because something essential is missing, what exactly have we removed from human life? And if that's true, what does real recovery actually need to restore? Next up, we move on to Chapter 7, which is called Integration and Liberation. We move on to Section 54, Integration from Peak to Presence.